Assalamu alaikum everyone. So we are going to continue from where we ended up last time. We had a gap of about 3 classes. Last week I wasn't being able to conduct the classes because of my personal reasons. So inshallah today's class will be our last class and we are going to finish the endocrinology part in that. Just to connect what we studied last time was that in our entire body we have different endocrine glands located in different regions. So, right, starting from the head in the brain, there are important endocrine glands like hypothalamus and few of them in the anterior pituitary and posterior pituitary. The most important thing to consider that these endocrine glands and their secretions, the hormones, they are kind of master secretions or master gland because they are going to control the rest of the endocrine glands and their secretions all across the body. So we have studied what sort of important hormone secretions are secreted from hypothalamus, from anterior pituitary and posterior pituitary, and what is the role and the function of those hormones in terms of affecting the other endocrine glands in the body, and also discussed about the imbalance or what we call the homeostatic imbalance, like if it's a hyposecretion or hypersecretion of these glands, then what sort of clinical conditions are associated with that. We also have studied about another important gland, that is thyroid gland, which is located in the upper section of the neck. And we also have gone through the clinical disorder conditions which are right in front of you, resulting because of the hyper or the hypo secretion of the hormones secreted by thyroid gland. So today we're going to continue with the next of the gland, which is a smaller gland located just underneath the thyroid gland, and that is being called as parathyroid gland. Now, parathyroid gland is located just underneath the thyroid gland. It's basically comprised of four small glands which are embedded on the posterior side of the thyroid. Now, these four small glands, which are just posterior to the thyroid, release the hormone called parathyroid hormone. This parathyroid hormone, PTH, having a function to stimulate the osteoclast, that means the bones, to free calcium. So that means there's a process of calcium absorption and resorption. That means from the blood to the bones and from the bones back to the blood. So this particular hormone, parathyroid hormone, is going to stimulate the osteoclast to free calcium from the bone, and it also stimulates calcium uptake from the intestine and the kidney. So there are two functions associated with that hormone. First, it is going to stimulate or enhance the uptake of the calcium from the intestine, that's coming from the diet, and from the kidney. If there is some going in the kidney, it's going to be resorbed. That means we don't want to waste the calcium going in the urine. And on the other hand, it stimulates the osteoclast, that means the bones, to free calcium from the bones as well. So this is what the primary role of the hormone parathyroid, which is being secreted by the parathyroid gland. Just like the other hormones, the homeostatic imbalance of the parathyroid hormone is also associated with certain clinical uh, functions or clinical disorders. As you have seen that the primary objective associated with that hormone is about the calcium absorption and resorption. So in this case, a severe hyperparathyroidism will cause massive bone destruction. That means if we have hyper condition, that means more of the calcium will be taken out from the bonds, and that would result in the bond destruction. Uh, if the blood calcium falls too low, as a result of that, the neurons become overactive, and that results in the clinical condition called tetany. So these are the two major clinical conditions associated with the homeostatic imbalance of parathyroid gland. Now, we all know that in the hormones, there is the concept of regulation, just like you guys have studied in case of all the metabolic pathways and all the metabolic reactions, they do have the regulation mechanism. And you know that that regulation of the metabolic pathway, which is primarily catalyzed by the enzymes, are associated with the regulation of the hormones as well. So this picture is going to explain you that how this feedback mechanism is working. So in this particular example, we are talking about actually PTH, the parathyroid hormone, that how it's going to affect the calcium absorption and resorption, and how it's going to impact the other parts of the body as well. So, in case of the negative feedback in calcium homeostasis, that means hypocondition, a rise in the blood calcium causes release of calcitonin. So now you can see that one of the effect caused by a particular hormone is going to affect other endocrine glands and thereby affecting the secretion of those endocrine glands. So in case of the negative feedback of the calcium homeostasis, which is related to the PTH, that will result in the blood level of the calcium increase. And this indication of the rise in the blood calcium will result in the release of calcitonin from thyroid gland. And what this calcitonin will do, it will promote calcium deposition in the bone. Why? Because the level of the calcium in the blood is high. So it's an indication to migrate the calcium from the blood into the site where they can be deposited. And the most important site is the bone. So the calcitonin is going to promote the calcium deposition in the bone and reduce resorption in the kidney as well. Like whatever calcium has gone in the bloodstream and passes through the kidney, like the PTH, what it's called, it's doing the resorption. But in this case, because the calcium levels are already high, because of the negative feedback, the resorption mechanism of the calcium in the kidney is also reduced. Now, as a result of this, a drop in the blood calcium causes the parathyroid gland to produce parathyroid hormone. Now, overall, this first step will cause, if it carries on, let's say, it will result in the decrease of the blood calcium level. And the decrease of the blood calcium is a factor which will, promote the release of the parathyroid hormone. And what parathyroid hormone do? You have studied. It stimulates the release of the calcium from the bone. That means just the opposite mechanism. And the PTH also promotes resorption of the calcium in the kidney to uptake calcium back into the blood. So this is what we call the feedback loop. Like if we have, let's say, a higher level of the calcium in the blood, that's what we call the negative feedback, and that will trigger calcitonin. The calcitonin will start, deposition of the calcium in the bone and reduce resorption of the calcium in the kidney. If this process goes on, it ultimately reducing the calcium level in the blood, and if it reaches a certain point below which the PTH will come into action, and the PTH will be stimulated or released, and it will do the opposite function. That means it will start the release of the calcium from the bone and also enhance the resorption. So that's how this is called a loop mechanism, where decrease and increase are kind of regulated with each other. Now the point where this loop is at equilibrium, I would say, or control, this is what is shown in the yellow here, homeostasis. What is homeostasis? The blood calcium level is about 10 milligrams per 100 ml. So if the level of the calcium is in this range, that's called the homeostasis. That means the normal range of the calcium in the blood. And at this point, we can say that both the mechanisms are balanced. If this level goes up, it results in the activation of the calcitonin. And if this level goes down, it results in the activation of the PTH. So that's how this loop mechanism works. The next of the endocrine gland that we're going to talk about today is adrenal glands. And as you can see the picture, this gland is located on top of the kidney. So these are actually two glands, and each one of them is located on the top of the kidney. We know that the kidney has two regions, cortex and medulla. So in this case, this particular adrenal gland, you can see in the picture, it has got one cortex region and one medulla region, and both of them have different hormones secreted from them. So from the cortex region of the adrenal gland, we have two very important hormones, corticosteroid, which is a steroid hormone, and glandular. While from the medulla region, which is in the inner side, not on the top, the cortex is the lower region here. So the medulla is associated with the release of some of the very, very important hormones like catecholamines and some of the neurohormones, which are neurotransmitters as well, which are epinephrine and norepinephrine. You might have studied about these two hormones, epinephrine and norepinephrine. They are being called as fright and flight hormones, and they are also being referred to as chemically neurotransmitters. So we have corticosteroid and glandular from the cortex, and catecholamine and neurohormones, which include epinephrine and norepinephrine from the medulla region. So let's talk about first the adrenal cortex. Now, in the adrenal cortex region, this activity is actually stimulated by a hormone ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone. And if you remember, this hormone was the one that was released from the pituitary part. Because as I said that the anterior and the posterior pituitary glands are the master gland, and they actually release certain hormones which are going to affect on the adrenal gland itself, and then thereby stimulating or deactivating that particular gland. So the cortex is actually stimulated by the hormone ACTH. Now it controls the prolonged responses by secreting corticosteroids, which are actually one of the hormones of the cortex region. Few of the corticosteroids which are being discussed here, three categories of the corticosteroids: mineralocorticosteroids, glucocorticoids, and gonadocorticoids. The mineralocorticoids, the example of that is aldosterone, and the function of this hormone is to regulate salt and water balance. So the function of this aldosterone itself is reflecting that why we call it mineralocorticoids, because it's going to regulate the salt and water balance. And how it regulates the salt and water balance, obviously it's going to affect the process within the kidney, where the blood passes through the kidney and the filtration takes place, and that's how the salt and water balance is being taken care of. While in case of the glucocorticoids, the example is the cortisol, and this particular hormone is involved in the regulation of specifically glucose metabolism, and also has got some role in the immune system as well. So this is what we call the glucocorticoid. And the third one is the gonadocorticoids, which relates to gonad. That means the sex hormones. And the two of them are androgens and estrogens. So these are the three important uh, corticoids released from the cortex, which also have specific function related to their role. Now, in case of the imbalances of the hormones of the adrenal cortex, there are again certain clinical conditions associated. For example, hypersecretion of them will lead to a disorder called Cushing disease, as you can see the picture. And in this Cushing disease, the ACTH releasing tumors or side effects of the corticoid drugs. Like sometimes we have, tumor conditions, or sometimes there are particular drugs which increase the level of ACTH, and activating the ACTH will then activate the adrenal cortex, and as a result of that, the hormones of that are increased, and that results in the Cushing syndrome. While in case of the hyposecretion, it leads to another disorder called Addison disease, which is actually the deficits in the glucocorticoids and mineralocorticoids specifically. Now, coming back to the second part of the hormone adrenal gland, which is adrenal medulla, and we know the hormones secreted from this particular region. The adrenal medulla is involved in mediating short-term responses by secreting the hormones catecholamines. Short-term responses means like the hormones released from that part will have its impact for a small time period and then quickly vanishes away. So they are not the hormones which have kind of prolonged effect, rather than they have a short-term response. So the cells are modified neurons and they lack the axons. So the hormones released from that is epinephrine, which is basically an adrenaline, and norepinephrine, which is being called as noradrenaline. We all know that these two hormones are called fight or flight hormone, and these are the hormones released as a response to stress, fear factor, increasing blood glucose, sudden increase of the blood pressure, and etc., etc. So you can see the conditions of the fight and flight, where we have the fear, anger, emotion, sudden increase of the blood pressure, sudden increase of the blood glucose, or stress. All these kind of things require a quick action, but we need that action for a short term, because these actions are itself quick and they vanishes away. So that's why the hormones epinephrine and norepinephrine act in a short term response rather than the long term, in contrast to other hormones. This is the picture how this hormones are going to impact in terms of their role as neurotransmitters. So if you look from here, like the stress is the first factor actually, which is causing the release of ACTH. This ACTH is going to act on the adrenal gland. Then the adrenal gland will be impacted by the release of its hormone. Similarly, we have one more pathway where the stress is causing the nerve cells to get activated, and thereby causing the effect on the spinal cord and then affecting the adrenal gland. So there are two pathways, you can say, that the stress is causing. Now, stress in this case is a stimuli, and this stimuli can either go by that route by activating ACTH, or it can go by that route by activating the spinal cord and then the adrenal gland. What is the difference? The difference is that in this route where ACTH is released, this is the activation in case of long-term stress response, while this is the case where you have the short-term stress response. So the stress response can be of two types as defined here. It could be short-term, or it could be long-term. Next endocrine gland to discuss, a very important endocrine gland, that is pancreas. Now, pancreas is a gland which is being defined as both endocrine and exocrine, and I already told you the difference of endo and exocrine earlier on. The exocrine glands are the glands having the duct to secrete their secretions, while endocrine glands directly secrete their secretions in the blood. So pancreas is both endo and exocrine. The exocrine part of the pancreas you all are well aware of in the digestive system, where the duct from the pancreas will bring the bile juice and digestive juice to the intestine. So we all know about this exocrine part. The endocrine part of the pancreas is also very important, and that is, from specific cells of the endocrine gland we call islets of Langerhans, and they are involved in the secretion of the two of the very, very important hormones that you all know, pancreas and glucagon. So the pancreatic islets, the specific cells are millions of cells that are embedded in pancreas, and their primary role is in the control of the blood glucose level. So as I said, that there are two very important hormones released from the islets, and they are insulin and glucagon. Insulin is released from the beta cells of the islets, and glucagon is released from the alpha cells of the islet. And we are well aware of the function of these two hormones. These two hormones are antagonist of each other. Their mode of action and their function is just opposite to each other. So this is a picture explaining you how these two hormones work. When you have increased level of amino acids, fatty acids, glucose in the blood, the insulin will come into action. That definitely that insulin is being released from the beta islets of the pancreatic cells, and then this is what does insulin is going to do. This insulin is going to transport specifically the glucose from the blood into the cells, and these cells could be the liver cells, the muscle cells, etc., where that glucose is going to be stored in the form of glycogen. While in contrast to that, the glucagon is a hormone which is being released as the level of blood glucose goes down. So the stimuli for the glucagon is the low blood glucose level. And as a result of this, this glucagon is going to target those tissues which are primarily the liver and the muscles where the glycogen reserves are there. And they thereby affect those reserves. And these reserves are hydrolyzed to give you the free glucose, and those free glucose molecules will then be taken into the blood. Now, beside glucose, you can see there's a role of amino acid and fatty acid as well, because they are also part of required ingredients in the blood. But we are not talking about them specifically. I am referring to the role of insulin and glucagon with reference to glucose here, specifically carbohydrates. So, in case of any imbalance of these hormones, again, there are clinical conditions, and the most important clinical condition we all know is diabetes mellitus. And the symptoms of the diabetes mellitus include polyuria, polydipsia, and polyphagia. Nowadays, there's a lot of debate going on the diabetes because it's been a matter of concern for many years, especially the last 2 decades, and it's being defined as that this is not actually specifically a disease, rather it's a syndrome, and it is associated somehow with a lifestyle. So that's why if you look at the symptoms, these symptoms are not uh, very severe symptoms like polyuria, like increased urination, increased food intake, or increased thirst level. These are these are quite common sort of symptoms that can be associated with anything. So it relates to our lifestyle, that how we are going to uh, eat the food, specifically carbs, and how we're going to utilize the carbs. But yes, it's a clinical condition, and we have two types of the diabetes, type 1 and type 2. We all know about that. Type 1, both of them are genetic, but type 1 and type 2, they have got some differences. In terms of the insulin level, in type 1, there is no or very, very low level of insulin, while in type 2, the level of insulin would be normal. The start of the type 1 normally starts from childhood, right from the birth, while the type 2 develop with the age 40 plus, you got more chances of developing type 2. The percentage of the type 1 within the population is 10 to 20%, and type 2 is 80 to 90%. Basic defects in the type 1 is total dysfunction of insulin. while in type 2 it's insulin resistance because insulin is there but it's not doing its work. There is no obesity in type 1, but yes, it is mostly associated or one of the factor behind the type 2. Ketosis is yes in the type 1 because when there is no alternative, then the body will use the ketone bodies and that results in ketosis. While in type 2, it's not that common. Treatment for the type 1 is because insulin is not there, so insulin injections along with the diet and exercise. While in case of the type 2, it's normally not insulin dependent, rather, we control it with the diet, weight loss, exercise, sometimes injections, and sometimes different medications as well. The next of the glands we are going to discussing about here are the gonads, and these are the male and female sex hormones as well. So there are two gonads. One is ovary and other is testes. In ovary, there are two important hormones, estrogen and progesterone. And in testes, there is one important hormone, which is testosterone. Both of them, or all of them, you can see that they are involved in reproductive functions and they are involved in the reproductive mechanism of male and female uh, reproductive cells. Then we have another gland that's called the pineal gland. This pineal gland is located in the brain just underneath the pituitary. And this is a small gland which is involved in the secretion of a specific pigment called melatonin. This melatonin inhibits early puberty and it also affects the day-night cycle of the human body, like the timing of the sleep, body temperature, and appetite, etc. This melatonin is normally secreted during the dark time, and it's that's how participating in the body clock. Melatonin is also having an antioxidant activity, and this melatonin is high when young, and it's reduced as the age progresses. Then we have another gland that's the thymus gland, and you can see the picture, and the location is just here between the lungs. The thymus gland is actually a thymopoietin thymin factor or thymosin. There are three important secretions coming from the thymus gland. All of these secretions are having a direct impact on the development and influence of the T lymphocytes. We all know the T lymphocytes are the kind of the cells in the blood which have their role in the defense machinery of the body against the infection. So this thymopoietins, thymic factor, and thymosins, they all have their direct impact on the development of the T lymphocytes. Now, there are some glands which are being defined as non-endocrine gland hormones as well. And some of them will be discussed here quickly. Number one, stomach. Stomach is involved in the secretion of gastrin. Then we have a small intestine, the specific part of the small intestine, which is the duodenum. We all know that it is involved in the release of gastrin, secretin, and cholecystokinin. Then the heart is involved in the secretion of atrial natriuretic peptide. Kidneys are involved in the secretion of erythropoietin and active vitamin D3. Adipose tissues are involved in the release of leptin resistant, and then placenta is involved in the secretion of human chorionic gonadotropin, human placental lactogen, and relaxin. So all of these names like cholecystokinin, secretin, gastrin, leptin, these all are hormones, but they are released from non-endocrine glands, and they again do have specific function in the body. So the functions which are primarily regulated by the entire endocrine system, considering right from the pituitary gland till whatever glands we have studied. So we are just going to summarize. So the functions which are primarily under the control of the endocrine system include growth, healing, water balance and blood pressure, calcium metabolism, energy metabolism, stress, and regulation of other endocrine organs. It is also involved in the growth mechanism, where there are certain hormones, what we call the growth hormones or the growth releasing hormones. Then we have human growth hormone, we have thyrotropin coming from the TCH, thyroxine and triiodothyronine, calcitonin and somatostatin. All of these hormones have their direct impact on the growth metabolism or the growth of the body. Then in the healing, you have growth hormone also involved in the healing, because that's also part of the growth. And glucagon and insulin are also involved in the healing process. In terms of the water balance and blood pressure, we have ADH, aldosterone, angiotensin 2, atrial natriuretic H, and epinephrine. These are the hormones involved in the water balance. Now you can see that this summary is going to let you know that this particular function and the involvement of different hormones coming from different glands for that particular region. Then calcium metabolism, we have already studied calcitonin, parathyroid hormone, estrogen, androgen, and also growth hormone has got its role in the calcium metabolism. For the energy metabolism, we have thyroxine and triiodothyronine coming from parathyroid, then thyroid stimulating hormone, epinephrine, norepinephrine, insulin and glucagon, very important, adrenocorticotropic hormone, and cortisol playing the role in the energy metabolism. And finally, in the stress, we have epinephrine and norepinephrine. The role of the T3 and T4 is not yet well established, but some scientists believe that they have a role in the stress as well, and ACTH and cortisol. So with this, we have completed the endocrine glands, and also completed our course. So we have finished the entire course, Alhamdulillah, and you guys have a lot of time to go through the preparation, because you have still more than a month is left. So we have gone very fast because of these online classes and lecture based presentations. So go through them, consult with the books I have recommended to you guys, and I'm available for any sort of questions you all know. So go through them, do your revisions, and come back to me if you have any questions to ask. So now I'm going to open the forum. If you have questions right now, you can just raise your hand and I'll be happy to give you the answers. Okay, so if there is no question at this stage, I'm going to finish the class and inshallah we'll share the recording. I believe that I already have shared the presentation with you guys. Just double check and let me know, and I'll share the recording. And then we'll have that WhatsApp group continue, and you guys can ask the question anytime, whenever you want. Inshallah, we'll be continuing with our labs, and we'll do some lab calculations in the coming weeks. Thank you very much, and Khuda Hafiz.